Okay, greetings, everybody. Oh, I see a few more people wandering in, but still. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the final lecture of the semester. Feels good to say that. It's been a good but trying semester. Anyway, I wanted to start this introduction by noting what is on the screen and thank Angelica Gallegos, a member of the class of 2021, for the creation of this map, which is our tribal lands acknowledgement. And it is my pleasure to welcome tonight's speaker, Abeer Seikaly, this semester's Louis I. Kahn Visiting Assistant Professor. As many of you know, the Kahn Visiting Assistant Professorship brings young architect educators to Yale, offering them the opportunity to lead an advanced studio. The gift that supports this professorship was made by an anonymous donor and has in its endowment terms the phrasing that it is, quote, for individuals who have been identified as young leaders in the field of architectural design in the hopes that Yale will be able to both support and benefit from the next generation of master architects. The first Louis Kahn Visiting Assistant Professor, Greg Pasquarelli, taught in the fall of 2004, and there have been 35 Kahn Juniors, as they are casually called, since then. Happy to be able to add Abeer to the list, which also includes, among 35 others, Jeannie Gang, Tatiana Bilbao, Michael Young, Omar Gandhi, Fernanda Canales, Stella Betts, and Chris Cornelius. Abeer Seikaly is a Jordanian-Canadian architect whose work crosses traditional disciplinary boundaries into design and fine art. She received both a Bachelor of Fine Arts and a Bachelor of Architecture from the Rhode Island School of Design. Her work has been exhibited at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the MAK Museum of Applied Arts in Vienna, and the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam, along with several other institutions and museums around the world. She has won a Lexus Design Award for her work on housing for displaced communities, and in 2015, she co-founded and directed the Amman Design Week. It's a personal pleasure for me to have Abeer here. I really enjoy walking through her studio area to see the latest constructions of her students. And I also appreciate the intelligence, curiosity, and engagement of fiber, hand making, and materiality in her own work. Abeer considers herself a diarist, so I look forward to learning more about her work and her life in tonight's talk. Please join me in welcoming Abeer for tonight's lecture.
Thank you, Deborah, for inviting me. I'm so happy and grateful to be here tonight with you all. So, okay. Last year, I received my first email from Deborah Burke asking me to confirm that I'll be joining the fall semester of this academic year to teach an advanced studio at Yale with no prior notice. And when I read that email, I remember I called my best friend Resha and I said to her, Resha, I just received an email from the dean of the Yale School of Architecture asking me to confirm a teaching position. Is this some sort of prank? Sorry, Deborah. But I remember this email landed in my inbox at the height of the corona crisis. I had been stuck in my house for over 6 months, physically displaced in my own home. I was uprooted from my work, from the various spaces I'd been inhabiting, and was shifted from where I belong, from where I'm used to being, to an unknown and unfamiliar place. I got infected with COVID soon after I spoke with Deborah, and I found myself in a situation where I had to then manage the recovery of my entire family from the virus. I spent months recovering from the twin circumstances of physical displacement and this new challenge that came out of nowhere, landed in my inbox, and pushed me into a mental exploration of what it is exactly that I want to teach. How can I breed creativity from within my current state of displacement and design a syllabus that helps students fulfill their own individual creations? How can this process help them express a renewed sense of connection to their environment? The concept of home became essential. Home in its various meanings, whether it's the place you're born, the community you're born into, or the meeting points along your journey that become fertile ground for creative expression and a truly present artistic process. Those in-between spaces shaped my artistic explorations. It was not the place I was in at the moment, but the state of being neither here nor there, at the cusp of something new, but still tied back by something old. This is how my work comes to life. My practice and studio space are rooted within this mindset, like a tapestry of personal memory that I've documented, collected, and archived, and which is continuously being woven. Exercises like field research, sensorial interaction, and handmaking bring this tapestry to life, leading my design processes in intuitive and experimental ways. It is those craft-led practices, along with my method of constantly asking questions, that allow me to rethink and reimagine what building and dwelling means in the 21st century, and how new architectural possibilities can be born from tradition and cultural heritage. So let's rewind 10 years ago when I inherited a traditional Bedouin rug that was hand-woven by my great-grandmother. Traditionally passed on through the family, this rug I received is characteristic through its colors and patterns of the holy town of Madaba, a place in Jordan that dates back to the Middle Bronze Age and that's mentioned in the Bible. I bring my great-grandmother to life and my Bedouin heritage every time I talk about the rug that she wove, a testament to the importance of preserving inheritance, the importance of the recognition of the past and of the things that tell its story. While each Bedouin tribe had distinct designs that mark the weavings, each piece is infused with an individual memory, that of its own maker, history, and context. In Jordan, rugs continue to be woven by women on traditional ground looms, constructed of stones, sticks, and other available materials. This ancient cultural technique of making textiles helped Bedouins adapt to their environment and ensure its survival. However, today, nomadism is becoming a phenomenon of the past, and weaving as a way of life is vanishing as Bedouin tribes leave the desert for a more settled urban existence. But the handmade objects of the past hold within them collective traditions, as well as tangible forms of memory. So when I reimagined my great-grandmother's rug, I saw both its pattern and her image merge into a new composition that tells the story of a fading tradition. In my own temporal looping back and forth between different media and stitch patterns, it became as much an exercise in recreating traditional weaving patterns as it was marking my own contemporary interpretation onto this memory. Those structural relics and their contemporary interpretations embody the imperishable beauty of communal processes like weaving, which creates inclusive social fabrics that manifest themselves around those cultural objects. And so this work has great significance and meaning to how I started weaving the threads of my present and future realities and the future of my work. At its core, my work has always been concerned with identifying a balance between the threads of tradition that stretch back in time and the dynamic and ever-evolving trajectory of technology, which propels us forward. So when I received a design brief set by a prestigious international design competition in 2013, this dynamic is exactly what fueled this next work. It was at the height of the Syrian conflict when displacement had become the reality of over 20 million people worldwide at the time, with Syrians constituting one of the largest communities of refugees in the world. As an architect, I felt compelled to act. Displacement camps I saw firsthand are uninviting environments that fail to foster any form of social interaction. Made up of temporary structures which follow dysfunctional systems of construction, they are too rigid to accommodate different scales of function, and they do little to support the host communities which desperately rely on them. I saw this polemic as a call to explore how my own interdisciplinary practices can generate dynamic solutions for this crisis. My work began to examine not only how architecture can act as an instrument for immediate social effect, but how technology is influencing the way we build, the way we live, and interact in the 21st century condition. So I developed the first iteration of the project Weaving a Home, an ongoing development of performative structural fabric systems that began as an exploration of the social implications of creating homes for displaced communities. Inspired by Bedouin nomadic tribes that travel across the deserts setting up fabric structures that were their only homes, my award-winning design became the first step in a journey of working on what I no longer see as a purely physical space, but as a social technology, one that explores shelter as a means of engaging and empowering communities. By examining traditional architectural typologies of tent shelters, which inherently marry locally sourced materials with suitable construction technologies, the conceptual crux of my model revolved around considering the structure as nothing more than individual threads of a cloth. The goal was not to create a homogeneous system, but to combine structure and fabric in a way that allowed the composite to perform in harmony. The geometry of my configuration capitalizes on the performative capacity of pre-stressed radial frames linked together to form a stable and durable double membrane enclosure. The resulting lightweight structure is able to withstand varying climatic conditions, integrating water collection, harnesses renewable energy, and allows for controlled ventilation, basically providing many of the comforts of a dignified contemporary life. Through the technical fabric, which acts as a decentralized integrated energy system, the product is resilient, collapsible, and potentially energy independent. One whose prototyping and development could yield different material applications that can be utilized in other building and construction typologies. In the process and time frame of its technical development, it was important for me to engage in an intimate building process to better understand the functional and constructional challenges and the areas that called for a collaboration with other entities. This process required an active engagement not only with specialists, but with local communities and hence different materials, tools, and technologies. One of the main challenges I faced in the evolution of the project in its initial 5-year duration has been in identifying the parameters of what it is, or more appropriately, what it has the potential to become. This took me through a learning cycle where I pushed to synthesize my studio and cultural production practices. And I needed to start from within my home country, Jordan. To engage with the cultural production of design is to provoke an awareness of the myriad ways that design shapes culture and that culture shapes design. So in 2015, I co-founded Amman Design Week, a biannual program and ongoing learning and community-driven platform that helps foster a culture of design thinking in Jordan. Posing the question, what is design in Jordan, became a question of authenticity in the context of diasporic influence and an urgency to engage in a vernacular voice not borrowed from other contexts. By devising a collaborative model whereby designers and curators are interactively engaged in dialogue, the production of such programs and events creates learning spaces that promote inclusive cultural dialogues and social interaction. My work as co-director within this project is part of my conscious engagement with cultural production as a means with which to explore a society's ever-evolving culture and identity. This cultural identity is manifested in many ways. It's manifested through the geographies of cities themselves, its spaces, its buildings, its streets, And in Amman, the sea of vacant and abandoned sites across the city offers countless opportunities to unfold and unravel the city's memory, and also offers resources for experimentation and innovation. I found an abandoned 53 square meter site that's, I think, about 570 square feet that I now refer to as the cultural shell. And I instantly felt its potential as a generative space, so I used it to craft a cultural experience program that aspires to interrogate the versatility of such abandoned spaces and to invert the usual spatial task of program seeks building into building seeks program. This was how almamar was born. Almamar means a passage in English. So the program presented a series of interactive exhibitions and events within the cultural shell that reflect on the evolution of traditional values, critical art practices, and the notion of transience within the context of Jordan. The cultural shell became a creative space not dedicated to one discipline, but to the choreographies of interdisciplinary collaboration, bringing together different communities from within Jordan and allowing them to co-create. So with all of the collaboration or the collaborative work I'd participated in and the forms of cultural production I'd contributed to, I felt an urge to archive and compile this work to reflect on my process and mobilize the documents I had. The first work I created after this phase was a video piece, one that helped me reframe my body of work through an exploration of women's roles as the silent architects of homes and of social fabrics. Please allow me to present just a short video piece called Matters of Time.
زي بعض الناس ذيك النهار قص الحلال يلا أهم شيء القص. شفتي هذا الخياط اللي ايش يكون من قدام يوم، شفتي كيف الخياط اللي مو زي البيت شقاق. ابراق ووسع على عبد المجيد حتى عبد المجيد ما يجي يشوفني، شنو مسك فضح من عبد المجيد ترى وسع له.
For centuries, the women of the Jordanians' nomadic Badia communities have assembled their tribes' tents known as Beit al-Sha'r, from goat's hair and sheep's wool. With limited resources, weaving has been their means of self-expression in the face of societal submission for centuries, architects silenced in a world of men. For them, responding to the environment has never been an intellectual exercise. It is their way of life. Unlike the structures of stone and concrete, which could one day be deserted, left as ruins in the shifting sands, the Beit al-Sha'r is a symbol of their voices and an ever-inhabited mobile home within which their daily lives unfold. And these are just some of the materials I found on site while filming, all building materials used to construct homes and buildings, but made from very different resources and having very different impacts on the environment. When I revisited the desert at the start of 2019 to continue my research of traditional tent-making practices, I began noticing how the Bedouin tent had started to disintegrate. As desert tourism takes precedence and climate change brings more extreme weather patterns, the Badia have slowly shifted toward building concrete houses. As I delved deeply into the desert, the image of my great-grandmother resurfaced. This heritage of matriarchal architecture is not only lost today, but the woman that wove them remains invisible. As men are called out to build these static structures and erect eco-lodge bubbles, the women held knowledge of adaptive environmental tent craftsmanship is hidden away, held captive behind another block in the patriarchal wall. That knowledge lives on through women's bodies, through their embodied and inherited skills of building and making. The inherently collaborative and cumulative quality of the Bedouin tent archetype brought to light the ways that architecture becomes an embodied process rather than a purely material outcome, a process that can evolve through reimagining and resituating traditional modes of making to create new cultural forms. I decided to return to the structural system that I'd already created for my tent in order to explore the possibility of using traditional tent material and extend my research to build a stable, multi-layered structural fabric. And this simple diagram represents two drawings of the same system, but with different formal, structural, and spatial possibilities. Through this project, I worked with 58 rural and Bedouin communities around Jordan, 40 of whom were women, Together, we created a handcrafted artwork that draws on the environmental rootedness of indigenous Bedouin social practice and knowledge, one that makes crucial use of the relationship between mind, body, and hands. The process of designing this material system began through creating multiple iterations of physical modeling and digital manipulation. Making models and prototypes helped me understand how the material behaves in relation to other members and how this network of elements can support each other and manifest as considered approaches to material, structure, space, and adaptive responses to the environment. I spent my time navigating between my studio space and traveling across the country, processing animal fibers and working towards understanding how the relationship I formed were going to help me develop this new material. Throughout this period, I saw how embodied approaches to making have been increasingly lost to industrial modes of production, and in many ways, our concept of technology has narrowed alongside that transformation. Moving away from the fabric structure of woven tent material, I instead created a stretchable knitted material composite of plant and animal fiber. The property of stretch creates a porous and pliable geometric pattern, which at the scale of the lattice structure lends the material system its mechanical properties. And I'd just like to clarify that initially when I started with this project, I looked very closely at weaving practices, but the material that I was searching for had to have a stretchable quality. And so my diversion to knitting as a fabric structure, lended that property. So here you can see, the material actually stretching. And the property of stretch creates, the individual material modules were then assembled through a methodical construction sequence. We connected 86 knitted modules in a predetermined double-layer pattern through a variety of seam details and connections. Wooden rods were then threaded through the seams of the textile, after which it was suspended to pre-stress the wooden rods into the fabric seams and join them using custom-made steel connectors. And I'd like to show you just a quick 1-minute time lapse of this assembly process. And the voiceover in the video is a conversational monologue by a Bedouin woman, basically narrating the meeting points between tradition, modernity, and tent making.
كنا نمد الحال نمشي هيك مسافة بعيدة بعد هذا التلة ناخذ الخيط هذا نمشي عشان نعمل شقاق نروح واحدة تقعد على راسها وواحدة تقعد فوقها وكنا هذا الخيط نمشي فيه ويروح ويجين وبعدين يظل ينطر في الشقة بالمحتى لما يجهزنها كيف كانوا يشتغلوا كيف كانت يعني قد ما احنا الحين الحمد لله نعمة الغسالات نعمة الحمد لله هو التطور حلو مو حلو بس رغم التطور لا تنسى انه احنا ابعدنا لان ما في حد يعني بيني وبينك حتى لما تحكي عن بيت الشعر تلاقي حتى الاولاد ما يساعدوك حتى الاولاد ما يساعد بيت الشعر من لينا منا مثلا تعالوا يا وليدي خلينا احيانا في المناسبات يروحوا يتصلوا مع تبع الخيام عشان ما يبنوا بيت الشعر رغم انه يحسسك بيت الشعر لما يتكرر وهيبه انا قبل ما خلفه يعني كنت اغزل وشيء الحين صرنا نشتري جاهز هسه غنم ما عندنا الغنم ما عندنا الحين بطلت الغنم بطلت بس عندي بيت شعر محتفظة فيه رغم هذا كله.
The project is a nod to the archetype of the Bedouin tent and a form of performative architecture recontextualized as a composite material structural design. It is a retelling of the Bedouin women's story through each connection, each meeting point intuitively felt by those anonymous weaving hands. These meeting points between material and structure, between nature and design space, and between designer and community challenged my conventional understandings of structures, from notionally static and load-bearing forms to a more communicative and socially dynamic configuration. A structural context which facilitates cultural empowerment of indigenous communities, not through a nostalgic and stagnant continuation of ancient crafts, but through new forms of innovative placemaking. Part of an ongoing communal architecture program, This constructed artwork is symbolic of how architecture and design processes can act as instruments for social change. It is an imperative platform for collaboration, only made possible through a new consciousness attributed to not only what we design and build, but how we choose to design and build. My interaction with the women revealed the potential of weaving these processes into the development of the material system that I'd first envisioned for the dome-like structure of weaving a home. The poetry of the Bedouin's tent's construction and my experience through making meeting points pushed me to rethink my approach towards building of the dome shelter, from its geometrical and material configuration to my relationship to it as an architect. More importantly, I came to see weaving a home as a creative building process that has the potential to advance new knowledge to pre-existing solutions developed by previous generations, placing itself within a continuum of tradition. In its present configuration, developed in cooperation with renowned London-based engineering firm Atelier 1, and its wonderful, and I must mention, founder Neil Thomas, who really helped me throughout this process. The project has evolved into a feasible structural realization and an innovative prototype design for production. This is one of the first prototypes we built back in 2015, and it was a quarter of the entire dome. At this stage, the future advancement of this holistic project is reliant on the manufacture of a full-scale prototype of the design. The project has gone through multiple phases since its inception in 2013. My initial objective was to build a portable, dignified shelter for displaced communities through a double-layer performative structural fabric in the form of a dome. However, the design's contextual link to land, culture, and heritage highlighted the need to consider the well-being of different communities beyond simply providing functional solutions. How can the design of a shelter truly create added value? I continued to build prototypes at different scales and placing them in different spaces to engage in a wider discussion about shelter and human creativity. The dome represents a continuity in the evolution of placemaking that is not linear but rather circular, rooted in the present but watered, fed, and nurtured by the past. My mission is to present a new form of shelter that combines innovative structural systems and design processes with traditional knowledge and natural local building materials and techniques to create a structure that is from the earth and adapts to its environment, a dome that is made in and from within Jordan. My great-grandmother's rug set me on a path of discovery. That red carpet took me to the unfamiliar and unknown spaces of different displaced communities. Through the rug, I understood that the tapestry she wove emerged due to a set of actions and interactions that connected her to the environment and its social fabric, a social fabric that has been torn today. The act of making textile is not dependent on some mechanical process that is devoid of human touch, but the foundation of weaving is laid on natural principles of living. In a way, the Bedouins are constantly constructing the architecture of their daily life, manifest in a continuous process of weaving and maintaining. The challenge, I think, is in maintaining our cultural heritage when we are continually displaced. This condition of displacement that I inherited is where I and many other communities exist, and it's also what constantly drives us to move forward, to create, and to make. It's through the objects that we bring to life that we begin to make sense of our condition by manifesting it in a concrete form. Being in that liminal space creates tension, and one can't always tell what's new from what's old, what's encroaching onto the space, and what's been holding its ground for decades. Just like in the case of the Badia, whose land and homes slowly filled up with foreign objects that suddenly became an intrinsic part of the place and its culture. It is this tension that drives action in the creative process. Thinking through the lens of weaving, not only through its physical formation, but as a general modus operandi within the context of architecture, the tension of fabric structures is generative, a result of engaging with material and physical space. I have not yet built my full-scale tent, but this long process of making the tent has more importantly allowed me to understand that the process is a form of production and formative force in itself. My idea of a structural fabric is still evolving while I'm now teaching our studio here in New Haven, while unfolding different creative processes and growing an understanding of my position as a maker within the context that I live in, Jordan. Thank you.